335. So now this term, it starts with this term, daye. And just before class, we were just talking about how Sanskrit, all the ancient languages, but Sanskrit in particular, how the meaning and the sound are inseparable. How so much of the meaning is conveyed through the sound. And so it starts with this interesting sound. So and then I was making the connection to eurythmy and how in the Western tradition, Waldorf schools, Rudolf Steiner, all of that, then there's this movement art form called eurythmy that's part of the Waldorf curriculum, and it's also used for therapeutic purposes. And that is movement based on sound. But anyway, from a eurythmy point of view, now that I'm in that eurythmy framework, the gesture for ha is this moving out, and the r is this rolling like a wave. And then d is this grounding. So anyway, it's an interesting word, daye, and it Guruji translates as on the heart. Metta, incidentally, translates it as in the heart. Anyway, and then chitta, which is a word that you know well, consciousness, and samvit, knowledge or awareness. It's a very short sutra in this regard. It's just the 3 words. So Guruji's translation, by samyama on the region of the heart, the yogi acquires a thorough knowledge of the contents and tendencies of consciousness. I think that's such an interesting way to put it, the contents and tendencies of consciousness. By Rohit Mehta says, by meditation in the heart, there comes an awareness of the functioning of the whole range of consciousness. So the other translations are similar. There was one here that I thought was interesting. Chip Hartfront says, focusing with perfect discipline on the heart, one understands the nature of consciousness. So I was thinking about how, we are currently living in such a polarized nation where like the 2 sides will never meet. It's like there's people are taking such extreme positions in our society. Politically, and even the vaccine has become politicized, and climate, there's just like such extreme points of view. And so it often feels like never the twain shall meet. But instead of getting hooked, this is sort of a challenge that I'm setting for myself, if you want to join me. Instead of getting hooked into, those people, that other side, they're such idiots, or they're not paying attention, or they don't believe in science, or, all those kinds of things. Can I use this opportunity of rupture and division to understand their consciousness, to expand my understanding of consciousness, of chitta, to be able to discern what the nature of their consciousness, how it's behaving in that moment. So for instance, instead of thinking, those people are stupid, if I can think of it as there's a trauma, there's a fear that is taking information and then interpreting it a certain way so that they are arriving at the opposite conclusion that I have arrived at. But it's not because they're flawed, it's because their consciousness is being shaped in certain ways that I can also relate to, because my consciousness is also shaped by my experiences, by my past, by my karma, by my ancestry, by my culture. And so if I can understand somebody's consciousness, then we might arrive at different decisions. But there's still like a commonality. There's still a connection. We don't lose that connection. connection to each other. I just want to read a little bit of Mehta's commentary because I think that it's really interesting. Chitta Samvit means an awareness of one's consciousness, and this sutra says it comes by meditation in the heart. This is not meditation on the heart. Here, heart is not to be understood as a physical organ. It's the midpoint between intellection and action. This is very repeated. This is very common key thing in yoga philosophy, is that this heart as the fourth chakra, as the midpoint between the upper chakras and the lower chakras, and so it's that halfway area. Now this is in contrast to some other Asian traditions in which the center is generally thought of as the danchen, the danchan, or the hara in the lower abdominal region. And so it's a different way of interacting with the world. It's a different way of applying consciousness, whether we think of the center as danchan or as hridaye. You know, I don't think that they necessarily like oppose each other, cancel each other out. I think it's interesting to observe the ways we relate to the lower chakras, the upper chakras, and integrate them. But anyway, the midpoint between intellection and action. So meditation in the heart really means meditation on that midpoint, which is the interval between thought and action. I love that, the interval between thought and action. It makes me think of that, you know, one of the quotes that I use in my email signatures is from Viktor Frankl, who said that pause before we act is the moment when anything is possible, is the moment when transformation can occur, when learning can occur. And so the interval between thought and action. In our life, we constantly experience a gulf between thought and action, which is thought to be bridged by greater activity of thought. That's the way our Western culture is structured, right? But such a bridge can never be constructed by thought. It is only when thought subsides, and with it, all efforts to translate it into action, that an interval comes. This interval is the heart, and it is meditation in this interval which awakens intuition. So last week we talked about, the last 2 weeks we talked about intuition. And so metta, the way Metta puts it, is that it's this interval between thought and action which awakens intuition. In an intuitive approach, action precedes thought. And when this happens, the problem of bridging the gulf does not exist at all. That's also really interesting, that the action has to come first. That in intuition, we act without thinking. You know, we just like, let's say a child is crying, or there's about to be an accident or something, or, you know, we act without thinking, and it's right action. In the beginning of class, when we talk about right relationship with the land, right relationship with the lineage of yoga, I feel like that's very, you know, it's very open to misinterpretation. It can be very kind of dogmatic, like what exactly is right action? You know, and in Iyengar yoga, we're often accused of being dogmatic, and people say, well, there's no right. But then we, you know, in many spiritual traditions, we do hear the term, we do use this term, right action, right relationship. And so how do we define that? How do we feel that? How do we sense that? And so I think this is giving us a clue. This, the way that Metta comments on it, that in that interval between thought and action is the place where intuition can be tapped or awakened. And it might be different today than tomorrow. You know, it's not like, okay, I have discovered right action, and then it's always the right action. No, it's not like that at all. It has to be flexible and fluid also. I want to just mention one other thing that I found really lovely, and from Brian's commentary, Vyasa calls the heart city of Brahman, city of Brahman. So city of God. I love that, just that image. And in the Upanishads, they refer to this chakra as the cave of the heart. And in the cave of the heart is where the Atman resides. And the Upanishads even say the Atman is the size of your thumb and sitting inside the cave of the heart. If you've been to any of the caves in India or elsewhere, you know, it's a very spiritual place. It's very sacred. And you can really feel that mountain energy, that stone energy, and picture how the ancient sadhakas came to the caves to learn and to meditate and to sit. And so yeah, I also love that image, the cave of the heart and the Atman sitting in the cave of the heart, and this city of Brahman. So anyway, I'm going to stop talking, and I would love to hear anybody who wants to unmute, anybody here in the room who wants to comment.
Crystal, who some folks know, who used to teach anatomy with us, we were having a conversation once about like where different traditions consider the heart to be. And I think she was referencing craniosacral, but I can't remember. And she was saying that the heart is actually, like a lot of traditions think of the heart center as much lower than we interpret it in Western culture. Like Western culture keeps moving it higher, but that, and like closer to the head, but that the heart is actually, in the tradition she was talking about, the heart was where the organic heart intersected with the stomach and the diaphragm.
Oh.
And so I think that's like really cool, because it's like this intersection of circulatory, respiratory, and digestive.
Yeah.
And it feels really important that it's close to digestion.
Mm-hmm.
But the heart, and it's actually where we would put the base of our thumb.
Uh-huh. Yeah, kind of like the base of the shoulder.
So it's actually like way down here instead of way up here, which feels important.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, thank you for that. I love that. It really changes the meaning and feeling and experience. Does anybody else want to comment?
I've been just thinking about how when thought subsides, you said when thought subsides is when we know how to act, and how that like interval, that space feels really scary. So I just like, I'm sitting with the question of like, how do we know then?
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at with all this.
I'm reminded of a story that I read in a book about the Freedom Riders. Do you remember the Freedom Rides of the 1960s? It was when college students and mostly young folks went down south. It was like the summer of 61, summer of 62, something like that. Early 60s during Jim Crow. And they decided that they would pair up white folks with black folks, and they would ride the buses together to desegregate the buses. Now they knew that they were going to have a lot of resistance and even violence. They anticipated that, and they did lots of nonviolence training, ahimsa training, in order to be able to withstand that, because they knew it was coming. And there's one story that I read in the book about the Freedom Rides where the bus was set on fire. The bus was bombed because as a resistance to the desegregationists, and the people of the town all came out to watch the bus burn, and the riders were all like stranded on the side of the road, you know, shaking and scared, and nobody, of course, this is the Deep South, nobody reached out to the riders at all, except for this one 12-year-old girl. One 12-year-old girl gave them water. And she was like cursed at, spit upon for helping the riders. She was acting out of intuition. She was acting without thought. You see somebody suffering, you want to give them something, you want to help them. That's normal. That's normal human behavior. The adults had talked themselves out of that. They had shut down that human instinct and intuition to assist somebody in being harmed. But the girl, the 12-year-old girl, still had that intact in her. And she was the only one. She was the only one.
I guess I'll just bring in a question that I have sometimes, because I have had like beautiful experiences. The Chanchani is really, every Shavasana is about this sort of like beautiful journey into the heart to make an offering there, or like to have to sort of like make a almost like a refuge or a prayer. So I relate to this feeling of like the abode of Purusha in the heart. But then I also kind of push back on that, because I wonder, well, if Purusha, if cosmic divinity is omnipresent, like if it, like how can it have a singular location? Like why in the heart and not in every other cell and every other molecule? Like if the divine is in everything everywhere, which maybe is more like kind of like the very vague thought I grew up with, because my mom was Quaker. Like she always was like, yeah, God is not some like guy up in the clouds. God is everywhere. God is in you and me and everywhere. And so I relate to that too. Like, so sometimes I kind of struggle with that. What I guess is probably just a false binary. Like, I think probably both can be experienced and both are true, but sometimes it feels troublesome. Like, well, wait, like if this is the abode of Atman, then does that mean that the abode is not in the other parts of my body or in these other areas or in, I don't know. That's what's coming up for me in the moment. If anyone else has thought about those things.
Yeah, maybe one way to consider that question, Avery, is to just come back to somatic sensation and to think about, or just to notice, on a regular basis, whether or not we're in a heightened situation or activated state. Just to continually come back to our somatic experience and somatic sensations, and then just to notice what we're feeling. I mean, I feel like for the chakras evolved out of the knowledge of the chakras is based on just observation of the body and sensations in the body. And so definitely like the sensations here are different from the sensations in my gut, which are different from the sensations in my head, and so then maybe one way to think of it is, yeah, if we really pay attention to what we're feeling, just on a sensory, cellular, organic level, then we can start to welcome the differences between these parts of ourselves and the ways that these parts of ourselves may be experiencing or embodying the sacred. That's just one idea. If anybody else has any thoughts.
Well, Guruji said we should feel God in our big toe, right?
Yeah.
So
I was thinking of that when I was, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, Vyasa doesn't say it's the only city of Brahman. When I say Detroit is the city of Black Revolution, it doesn't mean that Jackson, Mississippi is not. So maybe it's a way in which our minds are trained, our minds, that we are kind of forced to choose in this sort of binary thought structure that we're that we're part of.
One thing is our heart is kind of this central point that pumps blood throughout our whole body. So it's this overall like physiological connection to all points. So maybe it is all points then.
Yeah, I think of like there's some, I don't know where the story, or it might be from an Upanishad, but there's like a description of Ishvara as sort of like this net or web, and where every intersection is, there's like an eye that is the location, but then it's like this sort of like everywhere, right? Like it's not like there's just one. And so maybe this is like a good entry point if we are oriented and like located in a human body. Like this is sort of like a tap in, but right, maybe it's right. It's like an entry point to the everywhere.
Yes,
I don't know.
yes, definitely. A portal, one of many portals. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Let's chant it. Nice and short. Hridaye chitta samvit. 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 All right. Adho Mukha Virasana.